Hello everyone and welcome to NEETOPEDIA, that is NEETka Encyclopedia. I hope you are enjoying the audiobooks given on this channel, and today we are going to progress on NCERT class 12th biology with chapter 1 Reproduction in Organisms. So let's get started. Chapter 1 Reproduction in Organisms. Each and every organism can live only for a certain period of time. The period from birth to the natural death of an organism represents its lifespan. Lifespan of a few organisms are given in figure 1.1. Several other organisms are drawn for which you should find out their lifespans and write in the spaces provided. Examine the lifespans of organisms represented in figure 1.1. Isn't it both interesting and intriguing to note that it may be as short as a few days or as long as few thousand years? Between these two extremities are the lifespans of most other living organisms. You may note that lifespans of organisms are not necessarily correlated with their sizes. The sizes of crows and parrots are not very different, but yet their lifespans show a wide difference. Similarly, a mango tree has a shorter lifespan as compared to a peepal tree. Whatever be the lifespan, death of every individual is a certainty. That is, no individual is immortal except single-celled organisms. Why do we say that there is no natural death in single-celled organisms? Given this reality, have you ever wondered how vast number of plant and animal species have existed on Earth for several thousands of years? There must be some processes in living organisms that ensure this continuity. Yes, we are talking about reproduction, something that we can't take for granted. Reproduction is defined as a biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones, similar to itself. The offspring grow, mature, and in turn reproduce new offspring. Thus, there is a cycle of birth, growth, and death. Reproduction enables the continuity of species generation after generation. You will study later in chapter 5 how genetic variation is created and inherited during reproduction. There is a large diversity in biological world, and each organism has evolved its own mechanism to multiply and produce offspring. The organism's habitat, its internal physiology, and several other factors are collectively responsible for how it reproduces. Based on whether there is participation of one organism or two in the process of reproduction, there is of two types. When organisms is reproduced by a single parent or without the involvement of gamete formation, the reproduction is asexual. When two parents participate in the reproductive process and also involve fusion of male and female gametes, it is called sexual reproduction. 1.1 Asexual reproduction. In this method, a single individual is capable of producing offspring. As a result, the offsprings are produced that are not only identical to each other but are also exact copies of the parents. Are these offspring likely to be genetically identical or different? The term clone is used to describe such morphologically and genetically similar individuals. Let us see how widespread asexual reproduction is among different groups of organisms. Asexual reproduction is common among single-celled organisms and in plants and animals with relatively simple organizations. In protists and monorans, the organism or the parent cell divides by mitosis into two to give rise to new individuals. Thus, in these organisms, cell division itself is a mode of reproduction. Many single-celled organisms reproduce by binary fission, where a cell divides into two halves and each rapidly grows into an adult. Example, amoeba and paramecium. In yeast, the division is unequal and small buds are produced that remain attached initially to the parent cell, which eventually get separated and mature into new yeast organisms. Under unfavorable conditions, the amoeba withdraws its pseudopodia and secretes a three-layered hard covering or cyst around itself. This phenomenon is termed as encystation. When favorable conditions return, the encysted amoeba divides by multiple fission and produces many minute amoeba or pseudopodiospores. the cyst wall bursts out and the spores are liberated in the surrounding medium to grow up into many amoebae. This phenomenon is known as sporulation. Members of the kingdom fungi and some simple plants such as algae reproduce through asexual reproductive structures. The most common of these structures are zoospores that are usually microscopic motile structures. Other common asexual reproductive structures are conidia in penicillium, buds in hydra, and gemmules in sponge. You have learned about vegetative reproduction in plants in class 11th. What do you think? Is vegetative reproduction also a type of sexual reproduction? Why do you say so? Is the term clone applicable to offspring produced by vegetative reproduction? While in animals and other simple organisms the term asexual is used ambiguously, in plants the vegetative reproduction is frequently used. In plants, units of vegetative propagation such as runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, bulb are all capable of giving rise to new offspring. These structures are called vegetative propagules. Obviously, since the formation of these structures does not involve two parents, the process involved is asexual. In some organisms, if the body breaks into distinct pieces or fragment, each fragment grows into an adult capable of producing offspring. Example, hydra. This is also a mode of asexual reproduction called fragmentation. You must have heard about the scourge of water bodies or about the terror of Bengal. This is nothing but the aquatic plant water hyacinth, which is one of the most invasive weeds found growing wherever there is standing water. It drains out oxygen from water, which leads to death of fishes. You will learn more about it in chapters 13 and 14. You may find it interesting to know that this plant was introduced in India because of its beautiful flowers and shape of leaves. Since it can propagate vegetatively, it is a phenomenal rate and spread over the water body in a short period of time. It is very difficult to get rid of them. As you are aware how plants like potato, sugarcane, banana, ginger, dahlia are cultivated, have you seen small plants emerging from buds called eyes of potato tuber from the rhizomes of banana and ginger? When you carefully try to determine the site of origin, the new plantlets in the plants listed above, you will notice that they invariably arise from the nodes present in the modified stems of these plants. When the nodes come in contact with damp soil or water, they produce roots and new plants. Similarly, adventitious buds arise from the notches present at the margins of leaves of bryophyllum. This ability is fully exploited by gardeners and farmers for commercial propagation of plants, present in most of the animals. 1.2 Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves formation of male and female gametes, either by same individual or by different individuals of opposite sex. These gametes fuse to form the zygote, which develops to form the new organism. It is an elaborate, complex and slow process as compared to asexual reproduction. Because of the fusion of male and female gametes, sexual reproduction results in offspring that are not identical to the parents or amongst themselves. Study of diverse organisms, plants, animals or fungi show that though they differ. 1.2 Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves formation of male and female gametes, either by the same individual or by different individuals of opposite sex. These gametes fuse to form the zygote, which develops from the new organism. It is an elaborate, complex and slow process as compared to a sexual reproduction. Because of the fusion of male and female gametes, sexual reproduction results in offspring that are not identical to the parents or amongst themselves. A study of diverse organisms, plants, animals or fungi show that though they differ so greatly in external morphology, internal structure and physiology when it comes to sexual mode of reproduction, surprisingly they share a similar pattern. Let us first discuss what features are common to these diverse organisms. All organisms have to reach a certain stage of growth and maturity in their life before they can reproduce sexually. That period of growth is called juvenile phase. It is known as vegetative phase in plants. This phase is of variable durations in different organisms. The end of juvenile or vegetative phase, which marks the beginning of the reproductive phase, can be seen easily in the higher plants when they come to flower. How long does it take for a marigold, rice or wheat or coconut or mango plants to come to flower? In some plants where flowering occurs more than once, what would you call the interflowering period? Juvenile or mature? Observe a few trees in your area. Do they flower during the same month, year after year? Why do you think the availability of fruits like mango, apple, jackfruit, etc. is seasonal? Are there some plants that flower throughout the year and some others that show seasonal flowering? Plants, the annual and biennial type, show clear-cut vegetative, reproductive and senescent phases. But in perennial species, it is very difficult to clearly define these phases. A few plants exhibit unusual flowering phenomenon, some of them such as bamboo flower species, only once in their lifetime. Generally, after 50 to 100 years, produce large number of fruits and die. Another plant, Strobilanthes, in animals, the juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes prior to the active reproductive behavior. The reproductive phase is also of variable duration in different organisms. Can you list the changes seen in human beings that are indicative of reproductive maturity? Among animals, for example birds, do they lay eggs all through the year or it is just seasonal phenomenon? What about other animals like frogs and lizards? You will notice that birds living in nature lays eggs only seasonally. However, birds in captivity, as in poultry farms, can be made to lay eggs throughout the year. In this case, laying eggs is not related to reproduction but is a commercial exploitation for human welfare. The females of placental mammals exhibit cyclical changes in activities of ovaries and accessory ducts as well as hormones during reproductive phase. In non-primate mammals like cows, sheep, rats, deers, dogs, tigers, etc., such cyclical changes during the reproductive phase and therefore are called seasonal breeders. Many other mammals are reproductively active throughout their reproductive phase and hence are called continuous breeders. That we all grow old is something that we recognize. But what is meant by growing old? The end of reproductive phase can be considered as one of the parameters of senescence or old age. There are concomitant changes in the body during its last phase of lifespan. Old age ultimately leads to death. In both plants and animals, hormones are responsible for transitions between three phases. Interaction between hormones and certain environmental factors regulate the reproductive processes and the associated behavioral expressions of organisms. Events in sexual reproduction. After attainment of maturity, all sexually reproducing organisms exhibit events and processes that have remarkable fundamental similarity, even though the structures associated with sexual reproduction are indeed very different. The events of sexual reproduction, though elaborate and complex, follow a regular sequence. Sexual reproduction is characterized by fusion or fertilization of the male and female gametes, the formation of zygote and embryogenesis. For convenience, these sequential events may be grouped into three distinct stages, namely pre-fertilization, fertilization, and the post-fertilization events. 1.2.1 Pre-fertilization events. These includes all the events of sexual reproduction prior to the fusion of gametes. The two main pre-fertilization events are gametogenesis and gamete transfer. 1.2.1.1 Gametogenesis. As you are aware, gametogenesis refers to the process of formation of two types of gametes, that is male and female gametes. Gametes are haploid cells. In some algae, two gametes are so similar in appearance that it is not possible to categorize them into male and female gametes. They are hence called homogametes or isogametes. However, in majority of sexually reproducing organisms, the gametes produced are of two morphologically distinct types, that is heterogametes. In such organisms, the male gamete is called antherozoid or sperm and the female gamete is called egg or ovum. Sexuality in organisms. Sexual reproduction in organisms generally involves fusion of gametes from two different individuals. But this is not always true. From a recollection of examples studied in class 11th, you can identify cases where self-fertilization is observed. Of course, citing such examples in plants is easy. Plants may have both male and female reproductive structures in same plant, that is bisexual, or on different plants, that is unisexual. In several fungi and plants, terms such as homothallic and monoecious are used to denote bisexual condition, and heterothallic and dioecious are terms used to describe unisexual condition. In flowering plants, the unisexual male flower is staminate, that is bearing stamens, while female is pistillate or bearing pistils. In some flowering plants, both male and female flowers may be present on the same individual, that is monoecious, or on separate individuals, that is dioecious. Some examples of monoecious plants are cucurbits and coconuts, and of dioecious plants are papaya and date palm. Name the type of gametes that are formed in staminate and pistillate class. But what about animals? Are individuals of all species either male or female, that is unisexual, or there are species which possess both reproductive organs, that is bisexual? You probably can make a list of several unisexual animal species. Earthworms, sponge, tapeworm, and leech, typical examples of bisexual animals that possess both male and female reproductive organs, are hermaphrodites. Cockroach is an example of unisexual species. Cell division during gamete formation. Gametes in all heterogametic species are only of two types, male and female. Gametes are haploid, though plant body from which they arise may be either haploid or diploid. A haploid parent produces gametes by mitotic division. Does this mean that meiosis never occurs in organisms that are haploid? Carefully examine the flowcharts of life cycle of algae that you have studied in class 11 chapter 3 to get a suitable answer. Several organisms belonging to Monera, fungi, algae and bryophytes have a haploid plant body. But in organisms belonging to pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms and most of the animals, including human beings, the parental body is diploid. But it is obvious that meiosis, In diploid organisms, specialized cells called meiocytes, that is gamete mother cells, undergo meiosis. At the end of meiosis, only one set of chromosomes gets incorporated into each gamete. Carefully study table 1.1 and fill in the haploid and diploid chromosome numbers of organisms. Is there any relationship in number of chromosomes of meiocytes and gametes? 1.2.1.2 Gamete transfer. After their formation, male and female gametes must be physically brought together to facilitate fusion, that is fertilization. Have you ever wondered how gametes meet? In majority of organisms, male gamete is motile and female gamete is stationary. Exceptions are a few fungi and algae in which both types of gametes are motile. There is a need for medium through which the male gametes move. In several simple plants like algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes, water is the medium through which gamete transfer takes place. Large number of male gametes, however, fail to reach the female gametes. To compensate this loss of male gametes during transport, the number of male gametes produced is several thousand times the number of female gametes produced. In seed plants, pollen grains are the carriers of male gametes and ovules have the egg. Pollen grains produced in anthers therefore have to be transferred to the stigma before it can lead to fertilization. In bisexual, self-fertilizing plants, example peas, transfer of pollen grains to stigma is relatively easy as anthers and stigma are located close to each other. Pollen grains soon after they are shed come in contact with the stigma, but in cross-pollinating plants, a specialized event called pollination facilitates transfer of pollen grains to the stigma. Pollen grains germinate on the stigma and the pollen tubes carrying the male gametes reach the ovule and discharge male gametes near the egg. In dioecious animals, since male and female gametes are formed in different individuals, the organism must evolve a special mechanism for gamete transfer. Successful transfer and coming together of gametes is essential for the most critical event in sexual reproduction, the fertilization. 1.2.2 Fertilization. The most vital event of sexual reproduction is perhaps the fusion of gametes. This process called syngamy results in formation of diploid zygote. The term fertilization is also often used for this process. The terms syngamy and fertilization are frequently used, though interchangeably. What would happen if syngamy does not occur? However, it has to be mentioned that there are some organisms like rotifers, honeybees, and even some lizards and birds like turkey. The female gamete undergoes development to form new organisms without fertilization. This phenomenon is called parthenogenesis. Where does syngamy occur? In most aquatic organisms such as majority of algae and fishes as well as amphibians, syngamy occurs in external medium, that is water, that is outside the body of the organism. This type of gametic fusion is called external fertilization. Organisms exhibiting external fertilization show great synchrony between the sexes and release a large number of gametes into the surrounding medium in order to enhance the chances of syngamy. This is adulthood. In many terrestrial organisms belonging to fungi, higher animals such as reptiles, birds, mammals, and in majority of plants, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms, syngamy occurs inside the body of the organism. Hence, the process is called internal fertilization. In all these organisms, egg is formed inside the female body, where they fuse with male gamete. In organisms exhibiting internal fertilization, the male gamete is motile and has to reach the egg in order to fuse with it. In these, even though the number of sperms produced is very large, there is a significant reduction in the number of eggs produced. In seeded plants, however, the non-motile male gametes are carried to female gamete by pollen tubes. 1.2.3 Post-fertilization events. Events in sexual reproduction after the formation of zygote are called post-fertilization events. 1.2.3.1 The zygote. Formation of diploid zygote is universal in all sexually reproducing organisms. In organisms with external fertilization, zygote is formed in external medium, whereas those exhibiting internal fertilization, zygote is formed inside the body of the organism. Further development of zygote depends on the type of life cycle the organism has and the environment it is exposed to. In organisms belonging to fungi and algae, zygote develops a thick wall that is resistant to desiccation and damage. It undergoes a period of rest before germination. In organisms with haplontic life cycle, zygote divides by meiosis to form haploid spores that grow into haploid individuals. Consult your class 11 book Organisms from one generation to the next. Every sexually reproducing organisms, including human beings, begin life as a single cell, the zygote. 1.2.3.2 Embryogenesis. Embryogenesis refers to the process of development of embryo from the zygote. During embryogenesis, zygote undergoes cell division and cell differentiation. While cell divisions increase the number of cells in the developing embryo, cell differentiation helps groups of cells to undergo certain modifications to form specialized tissues and organs to form an individual. You have studied about the process of cell division and differentiation in the previous class. Animals are categorized into oviparous and viviparous based on whether the development of zygote takes place outside the body of the female parent or inside. That is, whether they lay fertilized or unfertilized eggs or give birth to young ones. In oviparous animals, such as reptiles, birds, the fertilized eggs are covered by calcareous shell and are placed in safe place in the environment. After a period of incubation, young ones hatch out. On the other hand, in viviparous animals, that is majority of mammals including human beings, the zygotes develop into a young one inside the body of the female organism. After attaining a certain stage of growth, the young ones are delivered out of the body of the female organism. Because of proper embryonic care and protection, in flowering plants, the zygote is formed inside the ovule. After fertilization, the sepals, petals and stamens of the flower wither and fall off. Can you name a plant in which the sepals remain attached? The pistil, however, remains attached to the plant. The zygote develops into the embryo and ovules develop into the seed. The ovary develops into the fruit, which develops a thick wall called pericarp that is protective in the function. After dispersal, seeds germinate under favorable conditions to produce new plants. Summary: reproduction enables a species to give generation after generation. Reproduction in organisms can be broadly classified into asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction does not involve the fusion of gametes. It is common in organisms that have a relatively simple organization, such as fungi, algae, and some invertebrate animals. The offspring formed by asexual reproduction are identical and can be referred to as clones. Zoospores, conidia, etc. are the most common asexual structures formed in several algae and fungi. Budding and gemule formation are the common asexual methods seen in lower organisms. Prokaryotes and unicellular organisms reproduce asexually by cell division in several aquatic and terrestrial species of angiosperm structures such as runners, rhizome, suckers, tubers, offset, etc. are capable of giving rise to new offspring. This method of asexual reproduction is generally referred to as vegetative propagation. Sexual reproduction involves the formation and fusion of gametes. It is a complex and slower process as compared to asexual reproduction. Most of the higher animals reproduce entirely by sexual method. Methods of sexual reproduction may be categorized into pre-fertilization, fertilization, and post-fertilization events. Pre-fertilization events include gametogenesis and gamete transfer, while post-fertilization events include the formation of zygote and embryogenesis. Organisms may be bisexual or unisexual. Sexuality in plants is varied, particularly in angiosperms, due to the production of diverse types of flowers. Plants are defined as monoecious and dioecious. Flowers may be bisexual or unisexual flowers. Gametes are haploid in nature and usually a direct product of meiotic division except in haploid organisms where gametes are formed by mitosis. Transfer of male gametes is an essential event in sexual reproduction. It is relatively easy in bisexual organisms. In unisexual animals, it occurs by copulation or simultaneous release. In angiosperms, a special process called pollination ensures the transfer of pollen grains which carry the pollen grains to the stigma. Syngamy occurs between male and female gametes. Syngamy